bit more around activating your pledge and digging into the pledge types. So Lindsey, I'll hand it over to you.
Sounds great. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay. You may have seen my name in your inbox before, but it's great to meet you. I just want to take a minute to emphasize that even though we're featuring some tech companies and we're based in San Francisco, Pledge 1% is a global movement. You saw it in our chat. There's people from Peru, there's people from Australia. Good day to all of you. And I talk with people from companies like one-man shows all the way to 12,000 people. So it really is a movement for everyone. And I have some case studies to feature today, but we are coming out with playbooks that will feature more. So let's talk about how to actually activate your pledge and do some social good. Pledge 1% splits its pledge types into 4 groups: time, product, profit, or equity. And the reason that we break it down like this is because businesses have all sorts of assets that they can use to help nonprofits. It's not just about money. It's your employees' brains and their time. It's what you're selling. It's just there's a lot of different ways to help. So even if you're not in a place where you can give money, there's still a lot of good you can do. I actually, most of the calls that I do with new members really focus on time or product because it's sort of a nice first step. And you might find that as you start to give one type of pledge, you expand to give more, and then it really becomes part of the foundation of how you do business. So over these next slides, I'm going to talk about different ways that companies can pledge time, product, profit, and just briefly touch on equity, but we have some great resources on that as well. So 1% of time. 1% of time equates to like 2 to 4 business days a year. What I like to tell new members about time is it's very important to establish a cadence. There's a lot of times that companies can give like a volunteer event. Maybe someone's niece is having a fun run, or it's the holidays and you want to have a social good event. But what can happen is sometimes that makes your strategy a bit more reactive instead of proactive. You're doing events as they come. If you want to make giving back into the rhythm of your business, we really think it's important to establish a cadence. So that could be something like one day a quarter, or like a giving back week. That's something we see that's really popular for bigger companies. For consulting companies, you could even do a few hours in the afternoon once a month. I call this First Fridays. Maybe you have a nonprofit client and you give them a few hours of your time on the first Friday of the month. Anything with a cute name, I'm sure Kate can tell you, can help. And it just becomes part of who you are and what you do, not something you're scrambling to put together at a moment in time. So we'll go to the next slide. In terms of volunteering time, there's a couple different ways you can think about it. Let's go to the gray columns first: skilled time and general time. Skilled time involves using your professional skills to give back. So that could be some sort of skilled volunteering or pro bono or discounted work. Maybe, I think I saw a CRM company in there. Maybe it's helping a nonprofit with their marketing efforts. You could even, if you don't want to, if your product doesn't necessarily speak to a nonprofit, you could build some sort of different product or content that might help them. For the CRM company, it's like how to market your nonprofit more effectively. You can even do mentorship opportunities to underrepresented communities. General time is something that doesn't involve your professional skill set, but can still be very helpful. Think about like volunteering to plant trees in a park or serve food to your homeless communities. You can even have nonprofits teach your employees about a certain skill and then have an action after. Let's say if you want people to get out the vote, you can have a nonprofit come speak at your company and then make phone calls to help people register after. That's a more political example, so you probably wouldn't want to do that, but something to think about. Another thing to think about is whether your culture is more independent or collaborative. When I say independent, maybe you want to empower employees to pick their own way to volunteer and their own causes. That's something called a volunteer time off policy, or VTO, where you give them a certain number of hours a year to spend volunteering. Or maybe you have a holiday coming up where they should do some good. For example, in the US, it's Juneteenth is coming up, and Pledge 1% is giving employees a day to go out and help their communities instead of coming to work. I think that's a very good way to spread the word. Another way to think about it is collaborative. Do you want your team to come together and do good? You can have a group activity of some sort. You could even make it virtual. We have some members that bring in their kids and make Christmas cards, or I mean, holiday cards of any type, really, or notes to senior homes. You could even have some sort of competitive element or hackathon. These are all a lot of ideas, so that's why they're on a slide that you can look at later. You also don't have to choose one or the other. Many companies do some volunteer time off and some collaborative events you can do as a group. So if you think, well, I can't just have time off, there's still a lot of things you can do to donate time. All right, let's go to the next slide. So next we're going to talk about products, and that seems pretty straightforward, but there's actually a lot of ways you can donate product. We heard from Cruise that they donated 1 million meals and to nonprofits. That's a very direct way to donate their product. You don't actually have to donate your product 100%. You could offer a discount for nonprofits. Find a way to verify that they're a nonprofit. For example, Canva, which I believe is an Australian company, for all you Australian members out there, they offer a discounted license for nonprofit organizations to use their marketing software, for design software. And then you could also make a separate version of your product that is specific for a nonprofit. That can be another way that you donate or product or use your product to do good. Let's keep going. And then finally, profit. Profit is the most straightforward in a lot of ways. 1% of your profit, donations to a nonprofit. But there's also a couple different ways that people calculate this. Pledge 1% really wants you to make your social impact your own. So, it doesn't have to be gross profit or net profit. You could do 1% of a certain product sold. For example, endangered species chocolate, each chocolate goes to a separate endangered species, right? So one for maybe this elephant here or something. I think I also saw that there was an e-commerce website. Some companies have you round up to the nearest dollar, and that extra can go to a nonprofit. That can be very popular for e-commerce companies, like this upon transaction model. We have other consultancies that every time they nab a big client, they work together to set aside 1% of the money from that to pick a nonprofit together that they want to donate to. That can be a great way to strengthen relationships. Or you can have some sort of employee matching program where you set aside a certain amount of money and your employees themselves can pick their own nonprofits to donate to, and you match that donation. That's great for companies that are a bit more independent and self-driven culture. Last slide coming up. And finally, we have equity. Equity can be very complicated. So luckily, we have a playbook that kind of details everything that you would ever need to know, including case studies. And we have an in-house equity expert that can answer your questions. So I'm going to skim over that today. But I would love to hear your questions or what you're doing for time, product, profit, and equity if you feel like it.
I love all those examples, Lindsey. I spent kind of the first few months when I was here at Pledge 1% sitting in on Lindsey's onboarding calls, and I love all of your creative ideas. We did have one question that was submitted in advance that I'd like to answer on here, or like to have put to the panel. It says, we would love to learn how other organizations are organizing volunteer days with the minimum business disruption. We are thinking of setting up specific days for employees to participate in shortlisted social impact initiatives sponsored by our company. What do you think, and what are your other thoughts?
Well, I love the idea of offering a list of opportunities that employees can participate in. For something like a volunteer time off, or just giving people time to volunteer, lots of times people won't necessarily take that first step on their own. So having a company give a list of volunteer times or a specific time to do it can make it very helpful. So kudos to you for that step. I would say to think about setting aside a certain time specific where the number one goal is volunteering, not business. That can be a day, that can be an afternoon, that can be sort of that a few hours at the beginning of the month, like we were talking about for that first Friday activity. But I think trying to do business and your volunteering is going to be sort of a setup for failure. But if you really reserve a certain chunk of time where your whole purpose is doing good, that can be very helpful. Another thing to think about is kind of the business goals behind your social impact efforts. Like these can make you feel closer as a team, or if you have an executive involvement, this can help cement some elements of your company culture. So you can tailor however you want to give back time to meet those goals. Oh, and it looks like we have a question from Orlando. Do companies usually choose two 1% pledges to support? And can you choose one? Well, luckily for you, Orlando, you can choose as many or as few as you want. We have plenty of companies that just do time or just do profit. We have companies that do it all. What it's really about is getting you to give back in whatever way makes sense. And 1% is a great number, but any percent is more than zero. So feel free to pick as many or as few as you want. Just give back. Any other questions from the team? I feel like a talk show host here. Oh, here we go. We have another comment from Amanda. Amanda, if you would like to speak instead, I'm sure people would love to hear your thoughts. Unless we have
I was just, I was muted. I was just chiming in on the volunteer question. I used to run Charles Schwab's employee and volunteer engagement programs, and that was 40,000 people across 300 cities. And we definitely had to consider how to balance the business need. So one thing that we did for that was creating staggered shifts. So if we had call center employees, for example, we would offer different volunteer opportunities each day at a variety of shifts. And then those teams and managers of those teams would agree on what percent or volume of employees they could release at a given day. So it was a little complicated, but I think there is a way to understand your business need and still design so that you aren't interrupting a full day of business if you are consumer facing to where you need to be available or some portion of your staff needs to be available. And my other thought was, if you create a framework and allow individuals and teams to run with that framework, they could design it around a team building event that at a time that works for them. And so there's a couple different strategies that have worked well for me in the past I thought I'd comment on.
How lucky are we to have someone who ran a 40,000 employee volunteer and now runs their own impact at Cruise? That's such a helpful insight. We do have Steve next talking about how to pick your nonprofit cause, but I'd love to take a few more minutes to answer questions if that's okay with you. Rebecca has a question about how to get a budget to donate or run a 1% program. That is always tricky, I'm sure. I was wondering, Kate, did you have any ideas about how to kind of isolate some of those assets, or I don't know if Steve does as well?
Yeah, I think it, again, it'll depend on your goals and your program, but I think how to isolate those assets. I think, sorry, can you rephrase the question? I'm trying to think about the best way to.
So it's in the chat. What are some successful models for getting a budget? And I will say, just while you're thinking, one way is we actually need executives to take the pledge. If you're like, we need executives on board to take the 1% pledge. So that can be a good way, is to just get executives involved from day one and be like, hey, we need you to be a part of this. And another way is to point to other people within your industry that are doing this sort of program and just emphasize that it is important. Those are some of my thoughts, but I don't know if you have any more, Kate.
Yeah, we are actually, and the reason why I pause is we're actually building out a tool for this right now as part of our Getting Started playbook. And so that's in development. We're really excited to be sharing that shortly. And, you know, there are different models. So it depends on, you know, your organization, the support that you have. And you also, again, want to use these milestones and moments to build and to, you know, even if you start with something small, to advocate for yourself so that you can get more resources to run the program, whether that's resources to hire or to do an event. And one of the key ways, again, maybe you have a budget set aside, maybe you can leverage your product donations and create a discount line, which then can help fund your program. Maybe you don't have any resources, but you can piggyback onto work that's happening with your marketing department, or you can get your IT team to help with your certain aspects of your program, or you know, look internally to pull help and resources. Again, it really depends and it varies widely, and there's a lot of different models and places to pull from. We will have more of that shortly, but I think if you want to email us separately, we can talk more specifically about, you know, your company structure and the resources that you have internally, or that you might be able to allocate to go specifically towards this.
It is nice about Pledge 1% that there are multiple pledges. It's not just money. So if you don't have a budget, you can still get back.